Welcome. You've made it to the end of the day. Whatever the hours asked of you, however much noise filled the spaces between morning and now, you can set all of that aside. This is a quiet place. Here, nothing is urgent. Nothing needs deciding. You can simply rest and let words drift past you like clouds, moving slowly across an evening sky. If your thoughts are still moving quickly, that's all right. It happens to everyone. The mind doesn't always know when the day is done, but you don't have to force it still. You only have to let it follow something gentle, something that asks nothing of you but a little quiet attention. And gradually, without effort, the thoughts will begin to slow on their own. Tonight, we're going to wander together through the natural world. Not in a hurried way, not like a tour with a schedule and a checklist, but softly, the way you might drift through a long dream where one thing becomes another without any sharp edges between them. We'll visit old forests and hidden oceans, places where the soil hums with invisible life, and the sky does things it has never told anyone about. We'll linger where rivers vanish underground and where stones seem to move in the night when no one is watching. Some of what you hear may feel familiar. Some may feel like something you half knew but hadn't quite put into words yet. And some may feel entirely new, a small door opening in a quiet room. None of it needs to be remembered. You don't need to hold on to anything. Just let the images arrive, rest for a moment, and then drift away. That's all. You can let the details blur whenever you like. So if you're ready, take one slow breath. Feel the weight of your body settle into the surface beneath you. And let's begin. Beneath the ground where you are lying right now, or wherever you happen to be, there is a world that most of us never think about. A world so dense with life that it makes the busiest city streets seem quiet by comparison. In a single teaspoon of healthy soil, there can be hundreds of millions of microscopic organisms. Bacteria that break down fallen leaves, fungi that weave through the dark earth in threads thinner than silk, tiny creatures called nematodes, almost invisible, moving through the spaces between soil particles. Creatures called tardigrades, barely visible to the naked eye, that have survived conditions that would end almost any other form of life. All of these organisms, too small to see, too numerous to count, form the living foundation of every ecosystem on land. They break down dead matter and return it to the soil. They pass nutrients to plant roots through chemical exchanges, so precise they feel almost like language. They create the conditions that allow seeds to germinate, trees to grow, and forests to stand for thousands of years. Without this invisible community, the green world above would slowly fall silent. Scientists discover new species in soil samples every year. Not just new varieties of known things, but entirely new kinds of life, organisms that have never been named, never been studied, existing quietly in the ground for millions of years, doing their work in the dark. It is humbling to consider that under the sole of a shoe, beneath a single footstep, there may lie a city of life whose population dwarfs all the people who have ever lived. Let that settle for a moment. The ground, patient and dark, holding more life than we can imagine. And above it, the living world continuing on, one season after another, sustained by things we cannot see. There are trees in this world that began their lives before any great civilization left its first stone. In the high deserts of the American West, places where the wind comes cold and the summer is brief. There grow bristlecone pine trees so old that they were already ancient when the earliest known cities were being built. Some of these trees are more than 4,000 years old. A few may be older still. They grow slowly. The way time itself seems to slow in places where winter lasts for most of the year. Their trunks twist and spiral under centuries of wind. Their bark weathered into ridges and grooves that look almost like stone, but inside, they are alive. Each year, the tree adds a thin ring of new wood, a record of that year's conditions. A wide ring from a good wet summer. A narrow ring from a cold, dry year. Drought and abundance, storms and stillness, all written into the wood. When scientists study these rings, they can read thousands of years of climate history from a single tree. The tree itself is a kind of archive, carrying time inside its body. What is remarkable about the oldest bristlecone pines is not just their age, but their patience. They do not hurry. In harsh years, they may barely grow at all. Parts of the tree can die back to preserve the rest. And then, when conditions improve, they grow again. It is a form of resilience so different from anything we practice in our own lives that it almost feels like a foreign kind of wisdom. Not fighting against difficulty, but wading it through. Not forcing growth, but allowing it. Standing near one of these trees, even in imagination, is to stand in the presence of something that has witnessed more than 4,000 winters. It was here before the first great empires, before the written word had spread across much of the world, and it is still making new leaves, still slowly growing, still patient in the wind. You can let that image rest with you for a while. An ancient tree, standing quietly in the high desert. The stars above it very bright. The air cool and still. Further down into the soil, beneath even the deepest roots of the oldest trees, something else is taking place. A network that has been there long before any forest we know of, and that will likely persist long after many forests are gone. Fungi, which are neither plants nor animals, but something in their own distinct category, form vast webs of thread-like structures called mycelium that spread through the soil in every direction. These webs can cover enormous areas, connecting the roots of trees that appear to stand separately above ground. Through these connections, trees can share resources. A large, mature tree, well fed with sunlight and water, might send sugars through the fungal network to a younger tree struggling in its shadow. When a tree is attacked by insects or disease, it can send chemical signals through the network that prompt neighboring trees to begin producing their own protective compounds before any pests arrive. Scientists who study these systems call them the Wood Wide Web, a quiet and largely invisible communication network running through the forest floor. This changes the way we might think about a forest. What looks from above like a collection of separate individuals is, below the surface, something more like a community. Not the sharp, competitive community of animals competing for territory, but something softer, more patient, a web of exchange and mutual support that has been operating quietly for millions of years. The details of how this works are still being studied. Scientists are still learning which signals pass through the network, how trees interpret them, what the limits of this sharing might be. There is much that remains uncertain, but the basic picture is clear enough. Forests are not solitary. They are connected in ways we are only beginning to understand. As you breathe slowly in the dark, it is perhaps a gentle thought to carry. That connection runs deeper than what is visible. That the things that look separate might not be quite as separate as they seem. The surface of the world is covered, in many places, with plants that do things we might not expect. Most plants move so slowly that the movement is invisible to us, but that does not mean they are still. Over days and weeks, they bend toward light, extend their roots into new soil, unfurl new leaves with extraordinary precision. Some, however, move in ways we can observe directly. The Venus flytrap, familiar to many people from photographs, grows in boggy soils in a small region of the American Southeast where nitrogen is scarce. To get the nutrients it needs, it has evolved a trap. Two lobed leaves hinged at their center, lined with tiny trigger hairs. When an insect touches these hairs twice in quick succession, the trap snaps shut in less than a second, faster than the human eye can easily follow. The mechanism works through changes in water pressure within the plant's cells, a hydraulic response triggered by touch. Once the trap closes, the plant slowly digests its catch over several days, absorbing the nutrients the insect's body contains. It is a complete hunting strategy. Detection, capture, digestion, and absorption. Accomplished without a nervous system, without a brain, without anything we would normally associate with hunting behavior. Other carnivorous plants have developed different strategies. Sundews hold out sticky leaves covered in glistening droplets that insects mistake for water or nectar. Once an insect lands, the leaf slowly curls inward, surrounding it. Pitcher plants have evolved deep tubes filled with liquid into which insects fall and cannot climb out. Bladderworts, which live in water, have tiny hollow bladders with trapdoors that spring open when triggered by small creatures swimming past, sucking them inside in a fraction of a second. Each of these plants lives in a place where the soil cannot give them what they need, and each has found, through millions of years of slow adjustment, a way to get it from somewhere else. There is no intent behind this, no decision, no awareness, and yet it works with extraordinary precision. Life finding its way through whatever gap is available. Deep in the tropical rainforests, a stranger drama unfolds. There is a group of fungi in the genus Ophiocordyceps that has evolved a relationship with insects, specifically ants and other arthropods, that is unlike almost anything else in the living world. When a fungal spore lands on an ant and germinates, the fungus begins to grow into the ant's tissues. As it spreads, it releases compounds that alter the insect's behavior in highly specific ways. The affected ant eventually leaves its colony and climbs to a certain height on a plant stem or leaf, positioning itself in a location that turns out to be ideal for the fungus to spread its own spores. The precise height, the precise positioning, the way the ant clamps onto the plant with its mandibles before dying. All of these behaviors appear to be driven by the fungus's chemical signals rather than the ant's own decisions. Once the ant has positioned itself, the fungus kills it and grows a reproductive structure from its body, releasing spores into the air below. This is a system that has been refined over a very long time. The fungi are not random. Different species target specific host insects and seem to have evolved very specific behavioral manipulations. Scientists studying these systems are still working to understand exactly which compounds are involved and how they work at the level of the insect's nervous system. It is not something to find frightening, but something to find remarkable. The depth to which evolution can go. The precision of what can emerge from millions of generations of trial and error. The way that life, entirely without intent, can develop systems of extraordinary complexity. You don't need to hold the details, just the feeling of a world whose complexity runs far deeper than anything we can see at a glance. Let that thought drift past slowly. In the oceans, other systems of equal complexity are at work, and the scale is different here. Larger, stranger, harder to hold in mind. Begin with something familiar. Coral. Most people have seen photographs of coral reefs that support such a variety of fish and other sea creatures. But the reef itself, the structure, is built by animals. Very small animals. Coral polyps are tiny, often only a few millimeters across, and each one secretes a cup of calcium carbonate around itself as a protective skeleton. When the polyp dies, its skeleton remains. New polyps grow on top of old ones, generation after generation, until the accumulated skeletons form the great structures we recognize as coral reefs. The Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, visible from space as a vivid patchwork in the blue water, is the work of countless billions of these tiny creatures over millions of years. The reef is not merely a structure, it is alive. At any given moment, the living polyps on its surface are feeding, growing, reproducing, and dying. The fish and other creatures that shelter in the reef's crevices are part of a community that depends on the reef's continued health. Remove the polyps, and the structure they leave behind begins to erode. The reef is only a reef because life is constantly maintaining it. This is a quality of many natural structures. They are not passive forms. They are processes. The shape we see is the shape of an ongoing activity, something that is continuously made and remade. The coral reef, the forest, the soil, all of them are more like verbs than nouns, if we look closely enough. Somewhere in the deep ocean, far below the reach of sunlight, another world exists. The seafloor at great depths is cold, dark, and under enormous pressure. It would seem, to any intuition shaped by ordinary experience, like a place where very little could survive, and yet there are volcanic vents on the ocean floor, where scalding water rich in minerals pours out from fissures in the rock, and around these vents, entire ecosystems exist. The organisms at the base of these food chains are microbes called hyperthermophiles, heat-loving bacteria and archaea that extract energy not from sunlight but from chemical reactions involving the minerals in the vent water. These microbes feed specialized worms and clams and crabs that crowd around the vents in extraordinary numbers, organisms that have never seen sunlight and never will. Above them in the water column, larger creatures wait for organic particles to drift upward. When scientists first discovered these vent communities in the 1970s, it genuinely changed the way we thought about where life could exist. Until that point, it had seemed reasonable to assume that all large-scale ecosystems depended ultimately on photosynthesis, on the sun. The vent communities proved otherwise. Here was life, abundant and diverse, built on chemistry alone, independent of the sun entirely. This has implications that extend beyond Earth. If life can thrive without sunlight in the pressure and darkness of the deep ocean floor, then it becomes easier to imagine life existing in other extreme environments, in the ice-covered oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa, or in the subsurface waters that may exist beneath the frozen crust of Saturn's moon Enceladus. The deep-sea vents reminded us that life's requirements, as we understand them, are narrower than life's actual possibilities. Let your breathing slow a little now. There's no hurry here. The images can come at their own pace. Deep ocean vents, glowing with the faint heat of the Earth's interior. Creatures moving slowly in the dark, indifferent to sunlight, indifferent to time as we count it. Patient and strange and quietly alive. In the forests of Central and South America, something happens at the margins of wetlands and lakes that seems, at first, almost like a mistake. Patches of land break away from the shore. Islands of soil and roots and vegetation drift out onto the water, carried by currents or pushed by flooding, their passengers unaware that they are moving. Over time, grasses take hold, then shrubs, in some cases. Trees grow on these floating platforms, their roots threading down through the dense mat of vegetation into the water below. These floating islands can be small, a few square meters, or surprisingly large, carrying entire miniature ecosystems as they drift. Birds nest in the trees and grasses above. Fish shelter in the root systems below. The islands shift with the wind and current, sometimes anchoring for a season, sometimes drifting for years before breaking apart or washing ashore. In some regions, they are woven into local stories, places that appear and vanish, that people claim to have seen from a distance, and then searched for without finding. What they represent, in a practical sense, is life's ability to continue in motion. The assumption that a forest is fixed, rooted to a single location for its entire existence, turns out to be only mostly true. Under the right conditions, even a forest can wander, slowly, at the pace of water and wind, carrying its community along with it. There are places on Earth where the water itself glows. In a small bay on the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico, called Mosquito Bay, the water is filled at night with a soft blue-green light. The light comes from microscopic organisms called dinoflagellates, single-celled creatures that produce bioluminescence when they are disturbed. Every wave, every paddle stroke, every fish moving through the water sets off a cascade of tiny flashes, turning the bay into a slow-moving constellation. The chemistry behind bioluminescence involves a molecule called luciferin, which releases energy as light when it reacts with oxygen. The same basic chemistry produces the glow of fireflies on a warm summer night, the faint trail of light behind a disturbed jellyfish, the flickers that drift through the deep ocean where animals use light to communicate, to lure prey, and to find mates in the absolute darkness. Mosquito Bay is exceptional because the conditions are just right for an enormous concentration of dinoflagellates to accumulate. Warm, shallow water, high nutrients, and the right degree of salinity. The result is water that lights up with every movement, so brightly that you can trace the path a sea turtle leaves behind as it passes, a glowing outline of an animal vanishing into the dark. People who have swum in these bioluminescent bays often describe the experience in terms that are hard to pin down precisely. Something like being held by light, something like the water remembering you after you move through it. The scientific explanation is clear, but the experience of it lives in a different part of the mind, the heart that knows wonder without needing to analyze it. You can let that image arrive gently. Dark water and a hand dip below the surface, lifting out in a brief shimmer of cool blue light before fading. It doesn't need to be more than that. High above the ground, birds are navigating journeys that would challenge any human navigator. The indigo bunting, a small seed-eating bird that weighs less than a golf ball, migrates between North America and Central America twice a year, traveling thousands of kilometers each time. It navigates at night, orienting itself by the stars, specifically by the patterns of stars rotating around the North Star. Young birds raised in captivity, with no experience of migration, still show the ability to orient themselves by starlight when tested in a planetarium. Experiments with these birds have demonstrated something precise and surprising. If the apparent rotation of the star field in a planetarium is shifted so that it appears to rotate around a different point, the birds reorient accordingly, as if they have recognized that the center of rotation marks north. Rather than memorizing the positions of specific stars, they are reading a principle, not a map. Humpback whales, in the depths of the ocean, are doing something different but equally remarkable. Their songs, long sequences of moaning, whistling, and rumbling sounds, travel through the deep sound channel of the ocean for hundreds of kilometers, sometimes thousands. The songs change over time, new patterns spreading through whale populations, the way a melody might spread through a community. A new phrase appears in the songs of whales in one part of the ocean, and then, season by season, shows up in the songs of whales in another region entirely, as if carried by the water from one community to the next. Researchers are still working to understand what whale song is for, whether it serves primarily to attract mates, to maintain contact across large distances, or something else entirely. But the fact of it is clear. These animals, moving through a dark ocean, are producing sounds of extraordinary complexity and carrying them across the world's largest habitat. A form of communication whose full meaning we have not yet learned to read. Take a breath. Let the sounds settle. Somewhere in the deep water, a long and resonant note, moving outward in all directions, gradually fading but not quite gone. Some of the strangest adaptations in the natural world exist at the margins between living and not living, in the realm of organisms whose survival strategies push against the limits of what we think of as life. Among these, tardigrades are perhaps the most remarkable. They are tiny animals, no more than a millimeter long, and they live almost everywhere on Earth. In the water film coating moss and lichen, in the sediment at the bottom of lakes, in the soil, in hot springs, in Antarctic ice. When conditions become hostile, tardigrades can enter a state called cryptobiosis. They expel nearly all the water from their bodies, withdrawing their legs and head, becoming barrel-shaped, shriveled things called tons. In this state, their metabolism slows to less than 1/100% of its normal rate. They can survive being boiled. They can survive being frozen in liquid nitrogen. They can survive radiation doses hundreds of times greater than what would kill a human. They can survive in the vacuum of space. They can remain in cryptobiosis for decades, and then, when they encounter water again, rehydrate and resume walking and feeding as if nothing happened. The biology of how they accomplish this involves special proteins that replace the water in their cells, forming a kind of glassy matrix that protects delicate cellular structures from damage. It is a kind of suspended existence, not quite life as we normally think of it, but not death either. A pause in a form that waits as long as necessary for the world to become livable again. Studying tardigrades has helped scientists understand the boundaries of life in general, and it has broadened the range of environments beyond Earth where life might conceivably persist. Let that thought be gentle, something small, dried and still, drifting through time, waiting. And then the return of water and the return of life. In the high deserts of North America, in a place called the Racetrack Playa in Death Valley, there is a dry, flat lake bed made of cracked clay. Across this surface, large rocks have left long furrows in the clay, trails that stretch for meters, sometimes changing direction, crossing each other, indicating movement. But no one has ever seen the rocks move. For most of the 20th century, this was an unsolved puzzle. The trails were clear. The cause was not. The answer, when it finally came, was both satisfying and characteristically understated. In rare winter conditions, a thin layer of ice forms on the lake bed at night. As this ice warms during the day, it breaks into large panels. When a light wind pushes these ice panels, they carry the rocks along with them, sliding across the thin film of water beneath the ice, with very little friction. The movement is slow, a few meters an hour at most, and it happens in the brief window when ice and wind and water are all present together. No one was there to see it because the conditions are rare and brief, and by the time anyone arrived to look, the ice had melted and the rocks were still again, their trails the only evidence. This is how many natural mysteries are resolved, not through some dramatic revelation, but through the patient accumulation of observations until the conditions line up and the explanation becomes clear. The rocks were moving all along. It only took the right kind of looking to understand how. Elsewhere in the world's deserts, the sand itself can produce sound. In a handful of sandy deserts, including parts of the Gobi and the Sahara, dunes will sometimes emit a deep, resonant booming or humming sound. The sound can carry for kilometers. It has been described as similar to a low drum beat or the sustained note of a large stringed instrument. Marco Polo wrote about it during his travels, though he attributed it to supernatural causes. The mechanism involves large numbers of sand grains of the right size and surface texture, dry enough and smooth enough that when they begin to slip together, they vibrate in synchrony, producing a resonant frequency that the dune amplifies like a musical instrument's body. The right conditions, usually a shift of sand on a dry day, can set the whole dune humming for several minutes. It is one of those natural phenomena that sits at the border between two worlds. The ordinary world of physics, where everything can in principle be explained, and the world of direct experience, where a landscape that appears entirely silent suddenly begins to sing. Both things are true at once. The booming dunes are completely explicable, and they are also, to hear them, extraordinary. Let that image rest softly. A vast slope of sand in the long quiet of evening, and then a low sound beginning, building, sustained, as if the earth had found a voice. Water, in its various forms, has a way of appearing in places where its presence seems surprising. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Antarctica, under kilometers of ice, there are lakes. Not frozen lakes, but keep the water liquid even at temperatures well below the normal freezing point of water. Lake Vostok, the largest of these subglacial lakes, is roughly the size of Lake Ontario and lies buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice. These lakes have been isolated from the surface for millions of years. Whatever lives in them, if anything does, has been evolving in complete isolation for an almost unimaginably long time. Scientists have drilled into the ice above Lake Vostok and found evidence of microbial life in the ice just above the lake's surface, suggesting that the lake itself may harbor life, though directly sampling it without contamination has proven extremely difficult. The question remains open. The Antarctic subglacial lakes are relevant to questions about life on other worlds because the ice-covered ocean on Jupiter's moon Europa may have similar conditions, a liquid water layer separated from any sunlight by a thick ice crust, with possible geothermal activity at the ocean floor. If life persists in Antarctica's buried lakes, it increases the plausibility of life in Europa's ocean. We are, in this sense, studying our own planet to learn what might be possible elsewhere. The dark lakes beneath the ice of Antarctica are windows into a universe of questions we are only beginning to ask. The Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean descends to nearly 11 kilometers below sea level, a depth greater than the height of Mount Everest above sea level. At the very bottom, in the Challenger Deep, the pressure is over 1,000 times what it is at the surface. The water is just above freezing. No sunlight reaches here. The darkness is total. And yet, when submersibles have descended to these depths, they have found life, not in great abundance, but present. Small amphipods, crustaceans related to the shrimp of the upper ocean, living in the sediment. Snailfish, pale and translucent, moving slowly through the water. Microbes in the sediment processing organic material that drifts down from the upper ocean over the course of months and years. The food web at these depths is sustained by a slow rain of particles from above, dead organisms, feces, the occasional whale carcass that settles to the floor and is consumed by a succession of specialized creatures. It is a system running on the leftovers of everything that lived and died in the bright water kilometers above. Patient, slow, dependent on what falls from a world it never sees. There is something quietly moving about this picture, though it is hard to say exactly what. Perhaps it is the patience of it. Perhaps it is the way life persists even at the very limit of what seems possible. Perhaps it is simply the darkness, and the thought that even there, in the deepest cold silence, something is moving. Something is alive each day. The billions of trees of the Amazon release enormous quantities of water vapor into the air through their leaves, a process called transpiration. This moisture rises into the atmosphere, cools, condenses into clouds, and eventually falls back as rain, much of which falls back on the forest itself. The forest is, in a real sense, generating a portion of its own rainfall, a feedback loop that has operated for millions of years, and that keeps the Amazon wet even in seasons when rainfall from external sources would be insufficient. These rivers of moisture in the air, sometimes called flying rivers, carry water far beyond the Amazon's boundaries as well. Weather patterns in Central and Southern South America, thousands of kilometers from the forest, are influenced by the moisture the Amazon puts into the atmosphere. In this way, the forest's health affects the rainfall of farmers in cities far from its edge. Scientists have observed that deforestation in parts of the Amazon is already reducing this moisture cycling, affecting regional rainfall patterns. The forest is not merely a passive landscape through which weather passes. It is an active participant in the climate system, one whose removal changes the system in ways that extend far beyond the boundaries of the forest itself. There is something to sit within that idea, that a living system can be large enough and interconnected enough to affect the weather. That forests and rivers and clouds are not separate things but aspects of one continuous process. The Great Barrier Reef of Australia, the largest structure built by living organisms anywhere on Earth, covers over 2,300 kilometers of the Queensland coast. It is home to thousands of species of fish, hundreds of species of coral, sea turtles, sharks, rays, and creatures so varied that a complete survey of its biodiversity has never been fully accomplished. From space, the reef appears as a patchwork of color against the deep blue of the coral sea, pale green and gold where the water is shallow, darkening toward the open ocean. The individual coral polyps that build the reef live in a remarkable partnership with microscopic algae called zooxanthellae that live within the coral's tissues. These algae photosynthesize, producing sugars that the coral uses for energy. In return, the coral provides the algae with shelter and the nutrients they need. The relationship is so intimate that the two organisms depend on each other entirely. Without the algae, the coral starves. Without the coral, the algae have nowhere to live. When the water becomes too warm, this partnership breaks down. Stressed by heat, the coral expels its algae, turning white in a process called bleaching. Without the algae, the coral loses most of its energy supply and begins to die. If the water cools again quickly enough, the coral can recover, taking on new algae and restoring its color. But if warm water persists, the coral dies and its skeleton remains, a white ghost of the reef it was. The reef has survived far longer than any human civilization. Its future is uncertain as ocean temperatures rise. But tonight we are not dwelling on uncertainty. Tonight we are holding the image of the reef in its fullness, the way it looks when the water is clear and cool and light filters down through the surface in shifting columns, and the fish move through the coral in slow spirals of color. Let that image be soft and still. The water above, the light moving through it. Somewhere far below, a sea turtle turning slowly in the currents. In the Himalayas, where two great tectonic plates are slowly pressing together, the mountains are still rising. The Indian subcontinent, moving northward at roughly 5 centimeters per year, is pushing against the Eurasian plate, and the crust is buckling upward, building the highest mountains on Earth. Mount Everest gains roughly 4 millimeters of height each year from this ongoing collision, though erosion wears at the rock simultaneously. The Himalayas are geologically young by the standards of the Earth's history. They began forming around 50 million years ago, when the supercontinent that would become India collided with Asia. Before that collision, there was a sea in the space where the Himalayas now stand, and the rocks that now sit at the summit of Everest contain fossils of marine creatures that lived on the seafloor millions of years ago. What was once the bottom of an ocean is now the roof of the world. There are mountains on Earth so old that they have been worn down to stumps by billions of years of erosion, the roots of ranges whose peaks vanished long ago. And there are mountains so young, in geological terms, that they are still visibly growing. The Earth is not a finished thing. It is still in motion, still building and tearing down, still reshaping itself according to forces that operate on a timescale so vast that an entire human civilization is barely a flicker. This is not an unsettling thought. Or rather, it doesn't need to be. It can simply be a reminder that the world was here long before us, and is not primarily shaped by us. We are, in the most fundamental sense, guests. Present briefly on a world that is entirely absorbed in its own long business. Let your body settle a little more into rest. There is nothing that needs doing. The mountains are rising without any help from us, and they will continue doing so long after we have gone. In the forests of Australia, the lyrebird has developed an ability that is almost difficult to believe without hearing it. This bird, which spends most of its time on the forest floor scratching for insects and other small creatures, can imitate almost any sound it encounters with extraordinary accuracy, not just the calls of other birds, though it mimics those too, but mechanical sounds. The beep of a car alarm, the shutter click of a camera, the whine of a chainsaw heard from a distance. It weaves these sounds into its own elaborate vocal displays, performed during breeding season on specially constructed mounds. The lyrebird's vocal apparatus is unusual, capable of producing an exceptionally wide range of sounds, and individual birds develop their repertoires by listening and practicing over years. The songs change over generations as new sounds are incorporated and old ones sometimes fade. There are recordings of lyrebirds from decades ago that include sounds from machinery no longer in common use, preserved in the bird's song like an acoustic fossil. In North America, the mockingbird does something similar, building songs from the calls of dozens of other species, changing its repertoire from moment to moment, sometimes singing for hours at a stretch. Individual mockingbirds have been recorded mimicking over 200 distinct sounds. Walking through a garden where a mockingbird is singing, you might hear a cardinal, then a jay, then a frog, then a car door, all in the space of a few minutes, all coming from the same small gray bird perched in a tree above you. There is something in this that is hard to categorize. It is clearly a biological behavior, shaped by evolution for the purpose of attracting mates or defending territory, but it also feels, listening to it, like something more than that. Like a kind of abundant creativity, a willingness to take everything heard and make it part of something new. The world is always making sounds. It is good to notice them from time to time, even in the quiet before sleep. The small sounds of the room around you. The sound, if you are somewhere that allows it, of the night outside, far from any city, in places where artificial light does not reach. The night sky is different from what most people see. On a clear night, in a place truly dark, the Milky Way is visible as a band of soft brightness stretching from horizon to horizon, a dense smear of stars too numerous to resolve individually, the edge-on view of the disk of our own galaxy. The ancient Greeks gave it the name we still use, from their word for milk, gala, because of its appearance. A pale river of light arching overhead. What that soft glow represents is the collective light of billions of stars, many of them similar to our own sun, many very different, distributed through the spiral arms of a galaxy roughly 100,000 light-years across. The light that reaches your eyes on a clear dark night left those distant stars years, decades, centuries ago. Some of it left long before any human was alive to see it, and has been traveling through the vacuum of space ever since, finally arriving here, now, at your eyes. The Milky Way contains, as far as we can estimate, somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. It is one of an estimated 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. The numbers are too large to feel, really, but the image of the sky on a clear night away from lights carries some faint impression of the scale. The darkness is not empty. It is full of something vast and patient and largely silent. You can let that image rest above you as you drift toward sleep. A sky full of distant suns, most of them invisible from where you are, all of them burning quietly, indifferent to everything and yet somehow part of the same fabric of existence that includes you, lying in the dark, breathing slowly, becoming less aware of thoughts. Some of the strangest things living on this planet are the ones that blur the boundaries of our categories. The platypus, native to eastern Australia, is a mammal, warm-blooded, covered in fur, nursing its young on milk, and yet it lays eggs. Its bill is rubbery and duck-like, not a beak but something else, sensitive to the electrical signals produced by the muscles of prey moving in the water. Its hind legs carry venomous spurs. When the first preserved specimens reached European scientists in the late 18th century, the naturalists who examined them suspected a hoax. That someone had stitched together parts of different animals and presented it as real. It is not a hoax. It is a reminder that life does not feel obliged to follow our categories. The features that we group together and call mammal are not a blueprint that evolution follows. They are patterns we have noticed in a subset of life. Patterns that most mammals share, but that can be mixed and recombined in unexpected ways. The coelacanth, a fish thought to have gone extinct along with the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago, was discovered alive in 1938 when a museum curator in South Africa noticed one in a fisherman's catch. Since then, 2 species have been confirmed, living in deep ocean water off the coasts of Africa and Indonesia. The coelacanth's body plan has remained essentially unchanged for over 300 million years, longer than there have been reptiles on land. Life contains, within it, forms that have proven so durable that they persist almost unchanged across geological ages, while other forms change rapidly, diversify, and sometimes vanish. The coelacanth swam in Devonian seas. No mammals, none of the forms of life that feel most familiar to us. And it is still here. There is something peaceful in that knowledge, in the right frame of mind. The world is patient. The deep forms of life are patient. The rock beneath your feet has been there longer than anything else you can touch. In the slow passage of seasons, certain plants do something that looks, from the outside, like waiting. Monocarpic plants, those that flower only once before dying, can spend years or even decades in vegetative growth before finally producing flowers and seeds. The giant Himalayan lily grows for years as a rosette of large green leaves before sending up a flowering stalk that can reach over 3 meters. The agave, native to the Americas, grows slowly in arid landscapes for anywhere from 10 to 30 years before producing a single towering flower spike that can be 6 meters tall, covered in hundreds of blossoms. Then it dies. The timing of these final flowerings is often synchronized within a population. with many plants of the same species blooming in the same year. This flooding of the environment with flowers and seeds overwhelms the capacity of local seed eaters to consume them all, ensuring that at least some seeds survive to germinate. It is a strategy called massed seeding when applied to seeds, and it works because the animals that eat seeds cannot build up populations fast enough to take advantage of the sudden abundance. For the plant, the final flowering is not a death so much as a completion. The energy accumulated over years or decades is poured into reproduction in a single season of extraordinary productivity. The individual plant ends, but the next generation is launched. There are glass frogs in Central and South America whose skin is so transparent that their internal organs are visible from outside the body. The heart, lit green by the surrounding tissue, beats visibly through the skin of the frog's chest. The digestive organs, the liver, the developing eggs in a female, all visible. The frogs use this transparency as camouflage, resting on the undersides of leaves, where the light filtering through the leaf blends with their translucent green skin. When sleeping, certain glass frog species concentrate their red blood cells in the liver, reducing the amount of opaque material in their circulatory system and making themselves even more transparent. Researchers studying this phenomenon found that the frogs could make themselves about 30 to 40% more transparent during sleep, which presumably makes them harder for nocturnal predators to spot while they are resting and unable to flee. The line between what is visible and what is hidden in the natural world is never exactly where we expect it to be. There are creatures we can see through. There are vast systems operating entirely in darkness. There are signals passing through the air and the soil that we cannot detect without instruments. The world is not primarily organized for our perception of it. This can feel, in the right mood, like a freeing thought. We are embedded in a world that is mostly happening without reference to us. The trees and rivers and animals are absorbed in their own processes, which have nothing to do with being observed. To rest in that world, simply as one creature among many, is not a diminishment. It is a kind of return. Let the quiet of that idea settle. The world going on in its countless ways, all around you, and you at rest in the middle of it. Some birds spend almost their entire lives in the air. The common swift, which breeds in Europe and Western Asia and spends its winters in Africa, is airborne for most of its life after leaving the nest for the first time. Young swifts, once they fledge, may not land again for 2 or 3 years until they return to breed. They eat in the air, catching insects on the wing. They drink by skimming low over water. They sleep on the wing. The sleep of swifts is still being studied, but it appears that they can engage in what is called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, resting one half of the brain at a time while the other remains alert enough to maintain flight. They typically do this while ascending on thermals to high altitude, then gliding down slowly as they sleep, covering distance even as they rest. Albatrosses use a related strategy during their years of wandering the southern oceans, covering tens of thousands of kilometers each year with a wing shape so efficient they can soar for hours without flapping, riding the wind gradients near the ocean surface. An albatross, once it leaves its breeding colony, may spend years at sea without touching land, sleeping on the water when the wind allows, in brief, alert episodes. The sky, which we move through only briefly and only with machinery, is a habitat where some creatures spend nearly their entire existence. It is a kind of life we can only imagine from below. Looking up, there is a particular quality of quiet in the sky at altitude. The clouds from above look nothing like they do from below. The horizon curves. Sounds from the ground have long since faded. The air is cold and thin and entirely still except for the wind. If you can imagine drifting there, borne on nothing but the movement of the air itself, it is perhaps the closest thing to weightlessness that an animal can experience without leaving the planet. Let that image carry you for a moment. High above the curve of the horizon, the silence, the slow movement of air, there are places in the world where the sky itself seems to descend. High in the atmosphere, above 80 kilometers, far higher than any weather, far higher than any cloud you would recognize, something delicate and strange gathers on summer evenings at high latitudes. Ice crystals form on tiny dust particles drifting in the upper mesosphere, and when the sun has sunk below the horizon, but still illuminates that extreme altitude from below, these clouds catch the light and glow. They shimmer in pale silver and blue against the darkening sky, rippled and feathery, looking like something that belongs in a dream rather than a meteorological chart. These are called noctilucent clouds. The name means, simply, night shining. They are visible only after sunset, when the rest of the sky has darkened enough to contrast with their faint luminescence. They occur mostly between 50 and 70 degrees of latitude, which means they are seen most often from the northern parts of Europe, Canada, and Russia in summer months. But reports of them have been growing more frequent at lower latitudes in recent decades, and scientists believe this may be connected to changes in the upper atmosphere that make the conditions for their formation more common. To see them for the first time is to experience a particular quality of surprise, the kind that comes not from something dramatic or sudden, but from something quietly exceeding its expected limits. You expect the sky to be dark after sunset. You do not expect it to glow. And when it does, softly, in those pale rippled sheets, the reaction tends to be stillness rather than exclamation, a held breath, a moment of simply looking. They are among the highest clouds ever observed. They form at the very edge of the part of Earth's atmosphere we think of as relevant to weather and life. Above them is space, essentially. Below them is everything. Let that image settle gently above you. The sky dark, and then, at the very highest edge of it, a soft silver light that should not be there and is. Some of the most extraordinary navigators on this planet have no eyes as we would recognize them. Sea turtles, after spending decades in the open ocean, return to the beaches where they were born to lay their eggs. The loggerhead turtle, for instance, hatches from its egg on a beach in Florida or the Carolinas, crawls to the sea, and then spends years traveling the North Atlantic in large circular currents. Years later, when the female is ready to reproduce, she returns to the beach where she was born, often within a few kilometers of her hatching site. How she holds this address in her body across decades of ocean travel involves, researchers believe, a kind of magnetic imprinting. When the turtle hatches, she encodes the magnetic signature of her birth beach. The Earth's magnetic field varies in strength and inclination at every location on the surface, and these values together form a kind of coordinate that can, in principle, uniquely identify any place. The turtle carries this coordinate within her, and when and she eventually swims toward a location whose magnetic character matches what she recorded at birth. She has found home. This is navigation at a level of precision and duration that we find extraordinary, but to the turtle, if we could ask her, it might be the most ordinary thing in the world. Every journey eventually leads back. Every coast has a particular feeling. You know it when you arrive. In the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest of North America, there are trees that have been standing for over 1,000 years. Coast redwoods and Douglas firs growing in the wet fog that rolls in from the ocean, reaching heights of over 90 meters. Their base is so wide that it would take many people holding hands to encircle them. These trees are not merely old. They are ecosystems in themselves. The bark of an old redwood is deeply furrowed, and in those furrows live dozens of species of insects, spiders, salamanders, and birds. The canopy of a mature old-growth Douglas fir holds soil, sometimes enough soil accumulated from decades of leaf litter and bird droppings to support full-grown ferns and huckleberry shrubs growing hundreds of feet above the ground, rooted not in earth but in the accumulated debris in the forks of enormous branches. Some of these canopy gardens have been measured and weighed by researchers who climb these trees on ropes, and they are genuine communities, complete with their own soil fauna and water-holding capacity. Marbled murrelets, seabirds that feed out at sea during the day, fly inland at dusk to nest on the broad flat branches of old-growth trees, sometimes kilometers from the coast. When the old-growth forests were heavily logged, the murrelets lost their nesting sites, and their populations declined. The connection between an ocean bird and an inland forest is not obvious, but it is real, and removing one affects the other in ways that ripple through both ecosystems. Old-growth forests are not simply large trees. They are the accumulated complexity of centuries, a kind of biological wealth that cannot be rapidly rebuilt once it is gone. The standing dead trees, the fallen logs, the layered canopy with its gaps and gradients of light, the deep soil rich with fungal networks, all of these require time. The clock started when the oldest tree was a seedling, and it runs very slowly. You can rest in the image of such a forest. The enormous trunks rising into the fog, the light arriving in shafts through the canopy far above, the quiet, extraordinary stillness of a place that has been building itself for centuries. There are volcanoes beneath the ocean that we rarely think about. Most of the volcanic activity on Earth does not occur on land. It occurs along the mid-ocean ridges, chains of underwater mountains that run through every ocean basin, where tectonic plates are pulling apart and new seafloor is constantly being created. Along these ridges, magma wells up from below, solidifies into basalt, and the ocean floor spreads outward from the ridge in both directions, carrying the continents along with it. The mid-ocean ridge system is the longest mountain chain on Earth, running for over 60,000 kilometers through the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Arctic oceans. Most of it has never been seen by human eyes. It lies in water too deep and too dark for ordinary exploration. Remotely operated vehicles have mapped portions of it in detail, revealing a landscape as varied as anything on land, with volcanic peaks, lava plains, collapsed calderas, and the hydrothermal vent communities we visited earlier. Occasionally, a submarine volcanic eruption builds a cone high enough to reach the ocean surface and emerge as a new island. In 1963, fishermen off the coast of Iceland reported seeing smoke and steam rising from the sea, and within days an island was visible. This was the island of Surtsey, formed by the ongoing eruption of a submarine volcano. By 1967, the eruption had ceased, and scientists immediately began studying the new island, tracking which organisms arrived first and how the ecosystem developed from a bare, sterile rock. Surtsey became one of the most valuable natural experiments in ecology. A new island, created at a known time, monitored continuously, showing how life colonizes completely bare land. The first arrivals were microbes, carried in the wind, then bacteria in bird droppings, then plants, whose seeds had been carried in by birds or on ocean currents, then insects, the process of ecological succession, the ordered sequence in which species colonize and transform a new environment, could be watched unfolding in real time. As you lie quietly, consider for a moment the patience of that process. Bare rock, and then, gradually, life arriving. Each organism changing the conditions slightly, making them more hospitable for the next. Centuries of slow accumulation. An island becoming a world. Beneath the bark of many trees, in the thin layer between the bark and the wood, insects live and feed and die in communities of extraordinary density and complexity. Bark beetles, which are responsible for some of the most dramatic changes in forests, when their populations surge, spend most of their lives in this hidden space. They chew galleries through the inner bark, laying eggs in carefully excavated chambers. When the larvae hatch, they feed on the bark and the cambium, the living layer of the tree. Their feeding patterns leave distinctive marks in the wood, branching or parallel or radiating, different for every species, like a signature. Many bark beetles carry fungi on their bodies, specifically in structures called mycangia, small pits or pouches that hold fungal spores. When the beetles enter a new tree, they inoculate it with the fungus. The fungus then grows through the tree's tissues, sometimes faster than the tree's defenses can respond, and begins breaking down the wood in ways that make it easier for the larvae to feed. The beetle and the fungus are partners in a relationship that has lasted millions of years. Woodpeckers can hear the beetles moving inside the wood. They have bills strong enough to excavate through the bark and extract beetle larvae from their galleries. Their skulls have shock-absorbing structures that protect their brains during this repeated high-force impact. Their tongues can extend several centimeters past the tip of their bills, curling around their skulls in the closed mouth, and are tipped with barbs that hook the larvae and pull them out. The woodpecker, the bark beetle, the fungus, the tree. These four organisms are locked together in a system of dependencies and interactions that runs through the forests of most of the world. None of them could be fully understood in isolation. Each of them is what it is in part because of the others. It is late now. The images can come more slowly. There is no hurry. In the high Arctic, in winter, the sun does not rise for weeks. The sky remains dark or lit only by the long blue twilight that comes at midday, a soft glow at the horizon that never quite becomes daylight and fades again before any warmth reaches the ground. During this polar night, the temperatures drop to ranges where ordinary life cannot persist. And yet the Arctic is not empty. Beneath the snow, in the insulating layer closest to the ground, small mammals called lemmings continue their lives almost as if summer had not ended. They excavate tunnels through the snow, reaching dried grasses and sedges beneath. Their body heat warms the subnivean space, the under-snow world, to temperatures well above those on the surface. Arctic foxes and snowy owls hunt them from above, listening through the snow for movement, the foxes sometimes leaping and plunging headfirst through a meter of snow to catch prey they located by sound alone. Out on the sea ice, polar bears patrol. The ice itself is not static. It shifts and fractures and refreezes in complex patterns, and the bears learn these patterns, traveling across an ever-changing surface in search of seals. Ringed seals maintain breathing holes in the ice, coming up for air at regular intervals. The bears locate these holes by smell and wait beside them with extraordinary patience, sometimes for hours, for the seal to surface. The Arctic in winter is not a place that asks to be hurried through. It is a place that rewards waiting. Everything that survives there has learned this. The bears wait at the breathing holes. The owls hover over the snow, listening. The foxes trace the scent trails of lemmings through tunnels they cannot see. Patience in this landscape is not a virtue. It is a biological necessity. There is something in this that feels worth carrying into sleep. Not urgency, but patience. Not reaching, but waiting. The way a polar bear waits, not anxious, not restless, simply present and still beside a hole in the ice, with the dark sky enormous above and the wind moving over the open white plain. Let your thoughts become as still as that. Let the day, whatever it held, move away from you. Let the images of the natural world carry you the rest of the way. The ancient trees in the high desert wind, the glow in the dark water of the bay, the monarch butterflies arriving at their mountain forest, the ice crystals at the edge of the atmosphere, catching the last of the light. In the ocean, there are currents that move on timescales of centuries. The thermohaline circulation, sometimes called the ocean conveyor belt, is a system of deep currents driven by differences in temperature and salinity across the world's oceans. Cold, salty, dense water sinks in the North Atlantic and flows southward along the ocean floor, while warmer surface water flows northward to replace it. This circulation connects the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Southern Oceans in a continuous slow loop that takes roughly 1,000 years for water to complete. As this deep water moves, it carries dissolved oxygen and nutrients to the deep sea. When it rises back to the surface in upwelling zones, it brings those nutrients with it, fueling blooms of plankton that support entire marine food webs. The productivity of some of the world's most important fishing grounds depends on this upwelling of deep, nutrient-rich water. The circulation is both a physical system and a biological lifeline for much of the ocean. The same circulation affects climate on land. The Gulf Stream, the surface current that carries warm water from the tropics toward northwest Europe, is part of this system. It keeps the climate of Western Europe considerably warmer than latitudes in Canada, at the same distance from the equator would otherwise be. The cities of Northern Europe exist in a climate that is partly a product of ocean currents far out at sea. This is another of those connections that runs through everything. The warmth of a city in winter, the fish in a cold ocean, the plankton at the surface, the deep cold water flowing along the seafloor, all of them part of the same slow circulation that has been moving for millions of years. carrying heat and oxygen and life around the planet in one vast, unhurried system. The ocean is never still. Even in the calmest weather, even in the deepest places, it is always moving. Something to rest with, perhaps. The image of deep water in motion, cold and dark, moving with enormous patience towards some distant upwelling, where it will rise again into light. And now the night is fully here. The room around you is quiet. Your breathing has likely slowed without your noticing. The day has moved far enough away that its details are beginning to blur, which is exactly as it should be. The world will go on doing what it does while you sleep. The mycelium will thread through the soil. The deep currents will move slowly through the ocean. Somewhere, a bark beetle will be making its careful galleries under the bark of a pine. Somewhere, a sea turtle will be swimming through warm water, carrying the magnetic memory of a beach in her body. Somewhere, a forest will be making clouds from its own breath, and those clouds will drift inland and fall as rain on mountains where old trees are slowly, almost imperceptibly, adding new wood to rings that have been growing since before any city was built. Deep in the forests of Central Africa, Borneo, and Sumatra, chimpanzees and orangutans have been observed doing things that, until not very long ago, were thought to be uniquely human. They make tools. A chimpanzee will select a thin branch, strip the leaves from it carefully, and use it to insert into a termite mound, withdrawing it covered in termites to eat. The selection of the right branch, the modification of it, and the purposeful use of it as an extension of the body to reach something otherwise inaccessible. This is tool use in the full sense. Orangutans have been observed using large leaves as umbrellas during rain. Sea otters float on their backs and use flat stones as anvils, placing shellfish on their chests and striking them with the stone until they crack open. Crows in Japan have been photographed dropping nuts at pedestrian crossings, waiting for cars to crack them, then waiting for the light to turn red before retrieving the pieces. New Caledonian crows manufacture hooked tools from strips of bark to extract insects from tree crevices. What all of these behaviors share is a quality that goes beyond mere reflex. They involve the selection or modification of an object to solve a problem, often a problem that the animal has never encountered in exactly that form before. They require some model of the world, some understanding that the tool and the goal are connected, and that acting on the tool will affect the goal. This does not mean that other animals think the way humans think, or feel the way humans feel, but it suggests that the cognitive structures underlying tool use are older than our species, that they were already present in ancestral forms we share with other animals, and that what we call intelligence is not a single thing that appeared suddenly in humans, but a set of capacities that evolved gradually and is distributed, to varying degrees, across the animal world. It is a perspective that invites a certain humility. We are not the only ones solving problems. We are perhaps the most elaborate solvers for now. But the problem solving began long before us and exists in many forms all around us. Let that thought move gently. The birds in the trees outside, the creatures under the soil, the slow decisions of a forest, all of them doing something. All of them, in their various ways, navigating a world. In certain desert regions, particularly in the Namib Desert along the western coast of southern Africa, beetles have evolved a way to harvest water from fog. The Namib receives almost no rain, But coastal fog rolls in from the cold Atlantic almost every morning, and the Stenocara beetle climbs to the top of a dune at dawn, tilts its body at an angle into the wind, and waits. Its back is covered in bumps that are alternately hydrophilic, attracting water, and hydrophobic, repelling it. Water droplets from the fog collect on the hydrophilic bumps, growing until they are heavy enough to roll down the sloped surface toward the beetle's mouth. The design is precise enough that engineers have studied it as a model for water collection systems. Desert tents and fog nets have been designed with surface structures inspired by the beetle's back. The architecture of a small insect navigating a particular kind of morning has become a template for solving human problems with water scarcity. This kind of translation from natural design to human technology is called biomimicry. Velcro was invented by studying the way burrs cling to animal fur. Bullet train nose cones were redesigned after engineers noticed that a Japanese railway engineer who was a bird watcher recognized that the kingfisher's beak shape, long and tapered, lets the bird dive from air into water with almost no splash, reducing the pressure wave that had been causing a sonic boom when the train entered tunnels. The shape of whale fins has been adapted to improve wind turbine blades. Spider silk, stronger than steel by weight and more flexible than most synthetics, is actively studied for applications in medicine and materials science. The natural world did not evolve to solve human problems. Its solutions are answers to entirely different questions, and yet the problems of moving through air and water, of harvesting energy and resisting force, and building strong, lightweight structures are problems that life has been solving for hundreds of millions of years, and the solutions are often better than what human engineers have produced in a few centuries of trying. There is something satisfying about this convergence. Not that nature exists for our benefit, it does not, but that the deep principles of physical reality are the same for all things navigating them, and that close attention to how life solves problems can teach us things we had not thought to look for. Let your mind rest on something quiet for a moment. The fog rolling in at dawn over a cold desert. A beetle tilted into the wind, patient still, waiting for the water to come to it. When a salmon swims upstream to spawn, it is returning. After years at sea, having traveled thousands of kilometers through the open ocean, it navigates back to the specific river, the specific tributary, the specific gravel bed where it hatched. The mechanism by which it does this involves, in part, the chemical signature of its home stream, a combination of minerals and organic compounds distinct to that particular place, which the fish can detect even at the extremely low concentrations present far out at sea. The journey is exhausting and, for most salmon, fatal. They stop feeding once they enter fresh water. They change shape and color, the males developing hooked jaws and vivid red coloration. They fight their way upstream against current and over waterfalls, sometimes leaping several meters into the air, sometimes being caught by bears waiting at the falls, and they reach the gravel beds where they were born, and they spawn and they die. Their bodies, decomposing in the stream, release marine nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus brought from the deep ocean, into the forest ecosystem. Trees near salmon streams contain nitrogen that was originally fixed in the open Pacific and carried upstream by fish. The salmon's journey connects two ecosystems that would otherwise exchange nothing, and the forest near the river grows differently because of it. There are connections of this kind running through every ecosystem. Nutrients cycle through air and water and soil and living tissue, passing from one form to another, from one place to another, in patterns that have no clean boundaries. What enters the ocean eventually leaves it. What falls from a tree eventually enters the soil and then the water, and then perhaps the air. The molecules that make up your body have been parts of many other things before arriving here, and will be parts of many other things after. This is not a melancholy thought, or it need not be. It can also be a feeling of continuity, of participation in something much larger than a single life, a single body, a single place. The materials that form you are arrangements. Long after the particular arrangement we call you has dissolved, let that rest very lightly. There is no need to think about it carefully. Just the soft sense of continuity, of matter moving through forms, of the world going on. In parts of Mexico, at a particular site in the Sierra Madre Mountains, millions of monarch butterflies arrive each autumn from a journey of thousands of kilometers. They travel from as far as southern Canada, navigating by the angle of the sun and by Earth's magnetic field, arriving at the same stands of oyamel fir trees where their ancestors spent winter for generations. The trees in these overwintering sites are covered so thickly with butterflies that the branches bow under their weight. When the sun warms the air in the morning, they begin to move, and the sound of millions of wings is described as similar to a very soft rain. The remarkable thing about monarch migration is that no individual butterfly makes the full round trip. The butterflies that arrive in Mexico have never been there before. They are the descendants, usually 3 or 4 generations removed, from the butterflies that flew north in spring. And yet they navigate to the same specific stands of trees. The information about where to go is not learned. It is carried in the genome, passed forward through reproduction. A map encoded in the biology of an insect the size of a postage stamp. How this works precisely is still being studied. The butterflies appear to have a time-compensated sun compass, an ability to track the sun's position, while accounting for the time of day, allowing them to hold a consistent compass bearing as the sun moves across the sky. They also appear to use Earth's magnetic field for orientation, particularly under cloudy skies when the sun is not visible. The overwintering sites in Mexico are extraordinarily specific. The particular temperature and humidity of those mountain fir forests keep the butterflies in a state of reduced metabolic activity throughout the winter without killing them, allowing them to survive until spring. A shift in temperature of just a few degrees can disrupt this balance. It is a system of beautiful precision, built over millions of years, depending on a specific patch of forest, a specific set of trees, a specific range of temperatures, and an internal compass written in the DNA of an insect that weighs less than a gram. The night is settling more deeply now. You can feel it, perhaps, in the quality of the quiet around you. Some of the oldest rocks on Earth are almost incomprehensibly ancient. Zircon crystals found in the Jack Hills of Western Australia date to over 4 billion years old, approaching the age of the Earth itself. These crystals formed in the very earliest period of Earth's history, when the planet was still cooling from its formation, and the surface was frequently struck by large meteorites. The zircon crystals carry within them, in the ratios of certain isotopes, information about the temperatures and chemistry of the early Earth. What those isotopes suggest is surprising. There appears to have been liquid water on the Earth's surface nearly 4 billion years ago, very early in the planet's history, far earlier than many models had predicted. The early Earth, in this view, was not entirely the hellish magma-covered world of popular imagination. There may have been cooler regions, perhaps even oceans, quite early. The oldest known fossils of cellular life date to around 3.5 billion years ago, though microbial structures have been claimed in rocks, perhaps a billion years older than that. The earliest life we have direct evidence of is already complex, already cellular, already using the basic molecular machinery that all life on Earth shares today: DNA, RNA, proteins, the cell membrane. All of these are present in the earliest confirmed fossils. What came before is unknown and may always remain so. The steps from chemistry to biology, from molecules to cells, from non-life to life, happened in an era whose rocks have been mostly recycled or destroyed by the geological processes of a living planet. We have fragments, we have chemical hints, we have a vivid picture of very early cellular life, and then before that, mostly silence. Some scientists believe that life may arise relatively easily wherever conditions are right, that the chemistry of life is not impossibly unlikely, that the transition from chemistry to biology may be, in some sense, natural, a process that the universe tends toward under appropriate conditions. Others think it may be extraordinarily rare, that the particular chain of events that led to life on Earth was essentially unique. No one knows. The question is open in the deepest possible way, and that is where we are. In a sense, all of us, living creatures on a small planet in the outer arm of a middle-sized galaxy, in possession of extraordinary abilities for observation and reasoning, and still genuinely uncertain about some of the most fundamental questions we can ask. How did life begin? Is it common in the universe or rare? Are we alone? These are not questions to answer tonight. They are questions to rest with, to notice that they are there, and that they are real, and that we do not know, and that not knowing can be, in the right frame of mind, simply a door left open. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to hold on to any particular image or idea. The mind can let it all move through, like water through an open hand. We have traveled tonight through soil and deep ocean, through ancient forests and hidden lakes, through the songs of whales and the navigation of butterflies, through rocks older than continents and creatures smaller than a grain of sand. We have visited places where the water glows in the dark, and places where the sand sings, and places where a forest is not many trees but one. We have passed by things that blur the boundaries of our categories, and things that have endured for hundreds of millions of years, and things that spend their entire existence in motion, never landing. All of it is happening right now, or has happened, or is slowly preparing to happen, in the dark and the light and the deep places of this world. The ancient trees are still turning towards spring. The salmon are still moving through cold rivers. The fog beetles are tilting into the wind. The butterflies are somewhere migrating. The mycelium is threading through the soil, passing signals. The subglacial lakes are quiet and dark beneath kilometers of ice. The night sky above you, whether you can see it or not, is full of the same stars it has always been full of. The same light, traveling the same distances, arriving at the same planet, the same air, the same dark. You are part of all of this. Your breathing is part of the atmosphere. Your body is made of matter that has been in this world for billions of years. Everything you are has been something else before. It will be something else again. Right now it is this. A living person, lying still, letting the day go, moving toward rest. It's all right not to understand everything. It's all right to let the questions stay open. The world does not require us to resolve it. It only asks, if it asks anything, that we be present in it for a while, and that we notice, sometimes, how extraordinary it is to be here. Let your thoughts drift now, wherever they want to go. The images can come and go without you holding them. The ancient tree, the glowing water, the butterfly in flight, the dark lake beneath the ice, the low sound of sand in the wind. If these quiet journeys through the natural world help you rest, you're always welcome to return to deep somna whenever you need to drift away again. The world will still be here. The night is long. And you can rest now softly, in the middle of all of it. Sleep well.